I'm Kimberly with the Fat Quarter Shop, and on today's Shortcut Quilt episode, we'll be making the Fat Quarter Cobblestone. It's fast, fun, and easy and has a great effect. So go to the Fat Quarter Shop website, go to our free pattern page, download the pattern, and let's get sewing. This quilt is all about cutting, and so there's going to be 3 different sets of fat quarters that you're going to layer and cut. Our first one, we're going to be cutting 15 fat quarters the same way, and so when I do that, I'm just going to stack 3 to 4 at a time to get a really nice cut. Our first cut's going to be 9.5 by 16.5, so I'm going to use an 8.5 inch ruler and then another ruler any size just so that I can get an accurate cut. I never use the mat for cutting. So first, I'm going to trim a little piece off to get a straight line. And since I need 9.5, I'm going to use the 8.5 inch ruler and the 1 inch line on this ruler and cut. Then I'm going to take this, line up the line on my cut, turn it, and then I'm going to cut 16.5 inch. And again, I'm using only the ruler and not the mat. I'm lining everything up just to make sure everything is perfectly rectangular. So this is going to be our A piece. It's 9.5 by 16.5 inch. And again, we're cutting 15 fat quarters into this, so we'll make a stack and set it aside. With the remainder piece, we're going to cut 2 rectangles that are 3.5 by 8.5. So I'm just going to use my 3.5 inch line and then I'm going to make 2 8.5 inch cuts. The good thing is this ruler's 8.5, so I'm actually going to just cut and cut. These are going to be our fabric B's, and we'll set these aside. And let's move to our next cutting. Our next step is to cut 8 fat quarters, and our first cut is going to be a 9.5 by 16.5 inch rectangle. We're going to cut that exactly the same way as we did before. Put a 1 inch so you've got 9.5 across. The 16.5 inch on the ruler. And you can tell I'm kind of slow at this. I really like to get an accurate cut. I'm really slow. Actually, cutting is my favorite part of quilting, so I always take my time. So these are going to be your fabric C rectangles, and we'll set those aside. Now we're going to cut 2 3.5 by 8.5 inch rectangles. Take the 3.5 inch line, since this is 8.5 inch ruler, I'm going to do the same thing as before. These are going to be fabric D rectangles. I'll set those aside and keep them labeled. Using your alphabetes is a great way to keep them organized because in this next step you're going to really need to look at your letters. And now we're going to cut another 3.5 inch strip. We're going to cut one 8.5 inch rectangle like we did before. This will be your fabric E rectangle. I set it aside. And then your last one is going to be one 4.5 inch rectangle, 3.5 by 4.5. So we're going to label that as your fabric F and keep your fabrics together, and we'll move on to our next set of fat quarters. So on this last set, you're just going to take 2 fat quarters, and our first cut is we're going to make 2 8.5 by 9.5 inch rectangles. Again, I'm going to trim off the edge, and first I'm going to make a cut that is 9.5. So again, I'm just taking my 8.5 inch ruler, adding an inch, and if you started with a 6.5 inch ruler, you could do the same thing. Just make sure you're using rulers instead of the mat. So that's 9.5. Now we're going to subcut 2 8.5 inch rectangles. I'm going to do this the same way. If you're uncomfortable cutting towards yourself, just don't do that, but I do it all the time at home. That's going to be a G. We're going to cut one more. Just line everything up before you cut. So you're going to have 2 G rectangles. Our last cut is we're going to cut 4 3.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. So first I'm going to do a 4.5 inch cut. And then I'm going to cut 3.5 inch wide segments now, and you're going to do 4 of those. And even when I'm cutting these really small pieces, I'm still lining up 2 sides. And these are going to be your fabric H rectangles. Keep them together. So as a review, here are all the fat quarters that we've cut. You just want to keep them all in stacks and keep them lettered, and then we're going to go to our design board and I'm going to show you how you do this. It's very easy. But the one thing you want to keep in mind is your smaller rectangles are going to stay with your bigger rectangles in order to form the plus signs that we've got going. So let's move to our design board. So remember I said all the work in this quilt is in the cutting. So you've cut everything, and then what you want to do is either use a design wall or the floor. To be honest, I don't have a design wall. My sewing room is super tiny, like I'm sure some of yours are, so I just use my bedroom floor. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of my rectangles, and remember I said you're going to keep your rectangles together. Your bigger and then your smaller. Follow the placement guide we have, because the letters all go in a little bit of a different spot to get the design that you want. I would lay everything out, make sure everything looks good, and then I would sew row by row. Get all your rows done, and then sew together the final quilt. And it's really not as hard as it looks, and you're gonna get this beautiful quilt. We hope you've enjoyed the Fat Quarter Cobblestone quilt. It's a great way to show off a collection of your favorite fabrics. I can't wait to see all of your quilts, so show them to me on social media with #CobblestoneQuilt, and we'll see you next time.